Hello, in this video we're going to look at how I made a persistable action bar in Unreal Engine. And so what I've done is previously I've created the action bar itself, so it was covered in these two posts over here. And this basically created this action bar at the bottom, and the second post covered how I was able to drag skills and drop them onto the action bar. So what I didn't do was actually persist this data, so that means that when I closed the game and restarted it, I would have to effectively repopulate that action bar. So what I wanted to do is save the action bar content onto my player character state essentially, and I've done this using my Java server, which is available on GitHub. So as usual, all of the steps to reproduce this will be available on this post, but I suspect that for many of you, you might want to be using external services like storage services for actually saving the action bar state. So for example, you might want to be using PlayFab character API. So there's an API for custom parameters on the character, so you might want to be leveraging something like that instead of obviously the custom server approach. So the general flow of data will remain relatively similar, but obviously the sources will be quite different, so therefore the implementation will be a bit different. But feel free to use all of the tips and tricks from this implementation where it helps you essentially, right? So what we'll probably do is just begin with a quick demo to see what it is that we've done, and then we'll just go through a bit of the overview of how it works. Okay, so for the demo, what we'll do is we'll just log into one of these characters, and what we can see here is that straight away the action bar gets populated with some data. So what we can do is we can just add some more skills onto it, and we'll see that even after restarting the game, it's going to go ahead and repopulate these. So obviously it still works. So for example, I click 7. I don't have validation, so I can throw fireball at myself. So there we go, the action bar is still working, and if I restart the game, you should find that it still preloads the action bar as before. So there we have it. This is the quick demo. It's essentially making sure that the action bar is actually loading all of the data that we need. So let's have a quick look at how it works. Okay, so in order to handle the action bar logic, we're going to bundle this inside the actions component that we've had previously. So inside my player base, which is used by my player blueprint, so this is the parent class, I have created the actions component, and inside there, when we're creating this actions component, we've got this event begin play, so we're going to be preparing some of the data. So what I'm going to be doing here is fetching the actor skills. So I first want to fetch the actor skills from the server so that I know what skills the character has, and once I've processed that information, I can go ahead and fetch the action bar. So it's kind of validating to make sure the skills are present. So you can see the request to fetch skills is available here, and what I'm going to be doing is once I receive the update, so you can see process message, so I've created this as part of the connected component base, so this was covered in some of the previous videos, but essentially when I get my update actor skills response, which gives me the list of skills that the player actor has, I'm going to go ahead and fetch the action bar. So I only do this if this is my player, and inside here you can see there's a request to fetch action bar, so this gets processed by my Java server. And in your case, this might be processed by either your UE server, so potentially it's connected to another database, or perhaps the PlayFab character custom params API, something like that. Essentially, there's several ways of doing this, but you can't necessarily do this via the just replication alone, and this is because that data is not persistent, right? So if you're just replicating the action bar and the UE server gets restarted, it gets shut down, started again, that information is going to be lost, right? So you do want to make sure that you save it to a database, or use some of these custom parameters API. Obviously, ones linked to the character are more ideal because you want to fetch it with the character in mind, right? Okay, so once the server processes that request, it's going to give me a response, and that response will be to update the action bar. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to grab myself the action bar. So the way I actually fetched it is using this function to get all widgets of class. And then it's only going to do this once, so this is not the ideal way of doing it, but ultimately this component was actually constructed before the widget was, so at the point of event begin play, this widget doesn't actually exist. So I do this after I get response when I know this widget is already created. But once I found it, I'm going to promote it to a variable, and then it's not going to do this lookup, right? So it's not that bad. And then once I have the reference to my action bar widget, I'm going to be updating the slots with the action bar content. Okay, so let's have a look at the designer view for this action bar widget. And so as you can see, this is the action bar. And specifically, I want to have a look at these action bar slots. So there's a couple of details that are quite interesting here. So each slot comes with three pieces of information. So the first one is the mapping key. So the mapping key will refer to what icon to draw here, essentially. So this is what button you need to press in order to execute that skill or item. The next one is the skill base. So this is a custom object I've created to represent my skills, and it will include information like the icon to draw to represent the skill and the skill implementation. So for example, when you execute this action bar, it's going to look inside this skill base object and execute the code from there. And then the last one, this is the new addition, it's the slot ID. So I'm going to be using the slot ID to identify or locate these slots inside the widget so that I can update them independently, right? So we can have a look at those in the graph. And I've actually updated this as I was making the video, as the previous way was very tedious. So essentially, I've got this horizontal box actions, and what I can do is simply get all children from this widget, and I can just cast each one to the action bar skill widget. And what I wanted to do is populate the action slot map, which is essentially just a map of string to the action bar skill widget or slot widget, action bar skill widget. And that's how I'm able to essentially quickly locate these action bars, right? So basically I go through each one, I grab the slot ID, and then I add it inside this action bar slot map, and then I can use this map in order to locate them really quickly in the next iterations. Okay, and if we go back to the actions component, remember we referenced this update slot function, right? So we got the action bar widget, and now we want to update the slot. So this is exactly how we managed to find the slot that we need to update. It's through this action slot map, where we basically have the key equal to the action bar ID, or rather the slot ID, right? So this is how we identify the widget that we need to update, and then we provided the action bar content in order to update it with, right? So the action bar content contains the skill ID or the item ID. So at the moment, like I say, the item IDs, I haven't added functionality for those yet, but this is something that I'll process in the near future. And what I want to do is populate it with a skill, right? So in order to do that, I actually get the actions component and the skill map. And the reason I do that is because I want to effectively make sure that the actor actually has that skill, right? So if I've got some erroneous data for some reason coming through, I don't want to be displaying that skill at the moment. So I basically validate it through the skill map that's available on the actor component, and I find that skill and set it as the skill base, right? And once I've done that, I can update the image. And as I mentioned, the skill base object contains the icon that we need to display. And I simply create a texture from that and update the skill image on here, right? So this is the widget. So you can see there's the skill image. So I grab my skill base, I grab the icon, and then I update the image to reflect that. So now it's effectively completing that flow. Okay, so now that we've seen how we populate the skills onto the action bar when we load the game, let's see how we manage to keep the action bar in sync as well. So this is actually handled by the drag and drop functionality that we've created previously. So essentially, like one easy way of achieving this is to send a request to the server anytime I detect the drag or drop functionality. So for example, when I drag a skill out of the action bar, that essentially means that I want to clear that slot up, right? So, and that's what you can see happening here. So on drag detected, I'm going to grab my actions component and I'm going to update action slot on server, and I'm going to provide the slot ID, but I'm going to keep the action bar content as null. So the server will actually process this as a delete on this slot ID. So that means I'm not going to have any content associated to that slot, and that will effectively clear that slot up. And when I drop a skill onto this action bar, I'm going to again update the server, but I'm going to provide the skill that I'm going to be updating it with. So later on, this can be a item reference as well. At this point, it's just a skill. And from the skill, all I need is the name, which is also used as the skill ID. So when I'm populating it with content, you can see that I'm using the slot ID as well as the skill ID. The actor ID is provided over here as part of the actions component call itself. So that's how I keep the action bar in sync. So it's a fairly trivial implementation here. And it can be improved essentially. So rather than calling it twice on drag and on drop, I could potentially encapsulate it into one request. But again, this was much simpler to implement, and the approach here is to sort of put a base implementation in place and then iterate and improve upon it. So this is how I currently keep it in sync. Okay, so perhaps we'll finish off with another quick demo. So we'll go into this new character. So again, I'll just go over some of the implementations that we've done here. So the first thing is when we drag a skill out of the action bar, this sends a delete request to the server, or rather it says update the action bar, but it doesn't provide you with any content, so the server will treat that as a delete operation. So we can repeat that on the different action bars. When we drag a skill into the action bar, this sends an update request to the server. So there's two ways of updating it. One is through the skill book. Another one is when I move the widget from inside this action bar itself, and then I can add another skill as well. So that's how we go ahead and populate it. When I restart the game, it's going to go ahead and load this data. So the first thing that it does is load up the character skills. So it populates these skills over here. Once it gets the information about the character skills, then it fetches the action bar. And when I load the action bar, I actually get the objects from the skills component in order to reuse the same objects, so that I don't duplicate them and things like that. And it also sort of partially validates to make sure that the actor has those skills. So that's how I manage the persistence for this action bar. And I suppose in the next videos I'll perhaps be looking to improve my inventory. So perhaps I'll want to add drag and drop functionality here and things like that. So at the moment I'm just doing a bit of cleanup and things like that. But yeah, that's it for this episode. So see you next time. Thanks. Bye.